Hey there, everybody. Well, we're going to talk about the EV mandate today because that's something that's been making a lot of rounds, and until very recently there wasn't an EV mandate, and now there is, but it's not the one you're probably thinking of. So I wanted to talk about it from the perspective of a longtime EV owner and somebody who's fairly up to date on my political understandings. And I think first of all we need to define what the difference is between what is being alleged and what is actually happening. So there is no federal EV mandate. There's no government law that's been passed at a federal level that requires auto manufacturers to do anything regarding electric vehicles. In other countries, I'm of course in the United States, in other countries there are rules about that, or banning the sale of gas cars, and then they kind of leave it to the automakers to figure out, well, what is the alternative? But in the US, there isn't one. So there is no mandate to get rid of. And even if they were, the idea that we would apply it at a federal level, given our fractured politics, is, I don't know how you would even pass that. It would be such an incredible, there's so much money from lobbyists being thrown around that, even at the state level, we can't get around dealership laws. Just dealership laws, and that's just from like the local car dealer lobby trade groups affecting legislation to favor themselves. Why in the world would you think we'd be able to pass a federal law of an EV mandate? Like, it's just absurd that it could even happen. But even if it did, and even though it has in other places, that would be one way that everybody ends up with electric vehicles. The way I think it will happen is either going to be state and local laws, which last time I checked was something that was held up as the best way of doing laws, was to have it done at a local level. We're going to let the states decide that. That's certainly what has been the talking point among other unpopular decisions, or polarizing decisions, not necessarily unpopular, but polarizing decisions, is that, well, we'll let the states figure that out on a case-by-case basis. And one state has, by the way, and does have an EV mandate, but I'll come back to that. But what really happens in the automotive industry typically is regulations sort of make for a path of least resistance, and the manufacturers happily jump into it if they didn't help create it on their own. And when we look at the traffic that we see on the road, it's usually not the result of government action specifically, but rather an unintended consequence of government regulation. Or, also very common, a very intended consequence of government regulation that the automakers made sure was there. So I'll give you a case in point. Corporate average fuel economy standards are something you hear about in relation to the selling of credits to Tesla. They buy them from Tesla to get the right numbers sometimes, and that's been a big part of Tesla's profit margin for many years now, is selling their excess credits, because of course their corporate average fuel economy is pretty darn good since they don't use any fuel. But that's usually how you hear about it. The thing you may not or may not be aware of, or maybe were aware of and didn't realize how pervasive it was, is that there's actually two CAFE standards, and I'll call them CAFE standards because it's a lot shorter than saying corporate average fuel economy. There's two CAFE standards. One involves passenger cars, and the other is light trucks and things like that. Well, when the standards were first put in place at the two-tier level, the idea behind it was that nobody bought trucks except for people that needed trucks. If you're hauling families around, you bought a station wagon. And then at some point, maybe you bought a minivan. But you certainly weren't going to do it in a truck. They're not livestock. Except the automakers figured out that they could sell people on the idea of SUVs, and that SUVs were a heck of a lot cheaper to make and commanded a pretty big price premium. So they started advertising them for families, and American consumers, well, we like our advertising. We bought these tough and ready vehicles because we're tough and ready. And they were never subjected to the same stringent standards that cars were subject to. So it didn't take very long for all of the traffic dropping kids off at school, for instance, to change from hatchbacks and sedans and station wagons to minivans to SUVs and then to crossovers. And if you don't like the idea, if you're on that libertarian thing and you're like, well, I don't like the idea of government meddling in industry and creating winners and losers and this and that, I would point out that these were all passed by Republican administrations. They weren't something that was foisted upon you by regulation-happy Democrats, which is kind of the assumption people make when they hear terms like the EV mandate. Well, it's going to come from Democrats for sure. Not necessarily. That's not how it's going to happen, maybe. So let's not assume. But then that was codified even more broadly under George W. Bush, who kind of linked the corporate average fuel economy standards to the footprint of the vehicle in question, which is literally how much space it takes up on the road. How big is it if your sun cast a shadow of it, right? And from there, we ended up with crossovers getting lumped in to the light truck category and not being lumped in with passenger cars. And guess what happened? Look around you. Crossovers everywhere, all over the place. And then that drives up the cost of, and they make tons of money, but that drives up the cost of everything else because everybody's still got to meet the same safety standards if they want to sell the cars to families and things like that, but the cars are heavier, so you have to have more stout structures, which means all the things. The end result is we ended up with a whole lot of cars on the road that aren't particularly fuel efficient, are being judged as trucks when it comes to fuel efficiency standards, but are being used as cars, and they're heavy and they're expensive and all those things. So while there was not a mandate for everybody to have crossovers, there might as well have been, because they went everywhere. Because consumers chose them. They didn't choose that they would be available. They didn't choose that other things would not be available, like station wagons. Good luck finding a station wagon if you want one. But the regulations dictated what the market would offer them. And so that is not the same as a mandate, but the effect to the consumer is very much the same. Your choice is limited by the regulations that are being enforced and by who put them there, whether it be the lobbyists for the automakers or whether it be, government regulators putting new standards in place, like CAFE. So, having said that, I think it's odd that we look at cars as such a political thing when there really isn't anything political about having the car, as far as how it's fueled, other than the fact that people can see by the badges or the brands how it's fueled. I would bet if you looked up and down your neighborhood street, if you live in a neighborhood, you wouldn't be able to tell me probably what most of the houses were using for their stoves and their ovens, whether they were gas, whether they were electric, or, and if they're electric, are they induction electric, or are they coil erection, or convection, or are they smooth top glass? Like, you don't know. You don't know what that family has chosen to do. If they want to have natural gas stove or oven in their kitchen, what business is it of yours? It's their house, right? Or I have an induction stove. Well, what business is it of you that I have an induction stove? Right? It doesn't even occur to people that there's a political statement associated with how they fuel their cooking, because it's cooking. It's just cooking. That's all it is. And cars really should be the same way. They're a consumer product that doesn't have an innate identity associated with it, or shouldn't. Some CEOs kind of make that hard to do, or to maintain that separation. Not naming names, but they shouldn't. They're a means of moving meat bags like us from one place to the other, and along with some other meat bags, however many you want to fit in there, and your cargo and things like that. But they're not they're a tool. They should just be a tool. The question then becomes for a consumer, well, what's the best tool for the job? Well, sometimes it's going to be an electric car. And I think over time, remember, this car is 10 years old now, that answer to that question of what is the best car for the average person is going to change. Now, I don't think you'll need a mandate to make electric cars the majority on the road. I think as more people are exposed to them and use them and have the infrastructure, they will choose to buy electric just like they chose to buy crossovers. And that's where I think the politics really needs to come out of it. And if you're watching this and you're not an EV owner, let me be your EV owner that you know. So let me give you an example. I was recently buying a TV. I'm sure you've also bought things. And you do a lot of research onto what are the specs and things like that comes from the manufacturer. But then you probably do, like I did, you go online and you look at the reviews of people who own that thing. And you especially pay attention to the reviews, like on Amazon, where they'll say verified purchase. These are people that really bought it. You can really maybe give them a little bit of an extra check mark on their review that they know what they're talking about because they actually did buy the thing. They're not maybe an influencer, they maybe didn't get a discount, they just went out and bought it. So you read those reviews and you take that into a deeper consideration maybe than you would an advertisement or a commercial, because you know that that's influenced by the manufacturer in some way, right? And you want as unbiased, unfiltered opinion of a product as you can get. But then when it comes to electric cars, I hear so many times talking points that I know are coming from places that are agenda driven, and people sending back to me stuff like, well, it takes hours and hours to charge, you have to replace the battery every 3 years, and all these kind of crazy things. And they're people that I know, and I'm like, okay, I am your Amazon verified purchase. You know me. I've owned this car for 10 years. I've been in your driveway with it. Why would you take the word of some empty suit on television at some news network or something like that, rather than me, who owns one and drives one every day and has for over a decade? That inability to harness the available information is crazy to me, that people don't weigh the folks they know with electric cars higher than what they have heard electric cars are like. And I think the more people that try them, the more opinions will be out there. And I mean, I don't need to tell most of you the advantages of an electric car in your day-to-day driving. Is it the right tool for every job? Not yet, but it is very, very close. And that brings me back to where there actually is an EV mandate. Apparently it's New Jersey. Who would have thought New Jersey would be one of the first states to have an actual statewide mandate that would ban the sale of gas cars effective 2035. New Jersey, this is a state where you still can't pump your own gas. I mean, they're an anachronism even in the modern world that they still have professional gas pumpers. It's crazy. I can't believe that. You hear that and you think, well, surely that must mean that it's a very difficult thing and everybody's riding horses still. Well, no, they're not getting cobbled, streets put in brand new or anything like that. But apparently, you still can't pump your gas in New Jersey, but they are going to require that you can't buy a new gas car in 2035, which is 11 years from now. Now, I will say there are loopholes there. You can bring a car in from out of state, which New Jersey is a pretty small state, so you don't really have to drive very far. You can go to New York or Pennsylvania or whatever, buy yourself a gas car and drive it across state lines, register. They'll let you do that. There's no ban on that. You can also buy used gas cars from anywhere and bring them in and register them in New Jersey. So it's a mandate that has some pretty big loopholes, especially if you figure that most people aren't buying new cars every single week, that if they are picking up a new car even every couple years, surely in a couple years, every couple years you can work your way the like 30 miles or so to cross state lines to buy the new car, if you really want it to. So nobody's being held up in any way and forced into an electric car that doesn't want to be. That said, it is a mandate. So it's interesting to me that they did it in New Jersey, of all places. But I don't think it's a big deal. And I think that by the time we get 11 years in the future, they're not going to need the mandate. And that is the piece of the puzzle that I think most people are missing, especially those who are totally freaking out over the car they're going to buy, possibly 2 cars from the one they're driving now, which is 11 years is an eternity nowadays as far as consumer products go, even cars. Now this car is probably, it's not quite closer to 11 years than it is 10, but if I look at where things were when I bought this car new 10 years ago and look at what has changed in that intervening time, both in terms of the battery technology, the charging, the infrastructure, and apartments will be a problem We're going to have to figure out how apartment people are going to work around that. That's a whole nother thing. But it has changed so much in that decade that trying to imagine what everything will look like a decade from now, I mean, even now, if you weigh the benefits of an electric car versus a gas car in terms of, you know, it's full every day when you start it, and the performance, the value of the performance, the way it feels when you drive it, the ease at which you can do a lot of things with it as far as the technology is concerned. And I'm rambling because I'm trying to get into this parking space, and I have my camera covered up because that's where my notes are, just to show that I do sometimes have notes. So did I cover everything? Yeah, well, I don't need to tell you. I don't need to tell you if you follow this channel regularly. There's a lot of benefits to having an electric car, and there's also a lot of things that are kind of not perfect right now, and that is okay. I have always tried to give the most unbiased opinion that I can, and it's going to be an opinion because that's just how it works. This is a very subjective thing. I always say you have to buy the car that you love, not the one that makes sense on a spreadsheet. Otherwise, you've bought the wrong car. You won't keep it long enough to realize the value of it. Well, here I am a decade later in a car that I still love. It's not perfect. It's certainly not perfect, but it is the best car I've ever had. And I think that when people realize the value of the EVs, the ease of use that they have. I mean, I'm running a couple errands here. I'm at Home Depot. This car's great for Home Depot, by the way. But when they realize the ease of driving it around, the technology, how great it is in pretty much all conditions that I can think of, it just, you know, you're not going to want a gas car 11 years from now. You're not. And when I look at the supercharger map for New Jersey, it's crazy what they have available to them now compared to the infrastructure that we have here in the Pittsburgh area, that you're not going to want. You're not going to feel that that is a burdensome mandate. So that's where I think that in this particular case, the regulations are irrelevant and the mandate is irrelevant, and the consumer is going to dictate what they buy as long as the industry provides them with the options that make sense. And I think the industry is getting a lot better about that. And my gosh, look how far we've come in 10 years. Imagine 10 years from now. And then you'd still have a year before the mandate went in effect. In the meantime, enjoy pumping your own gas, New Jersey. Oh wait, no, you still can't do that. All right, well, thanks for watching, everybody. See you later.